Hello, I'm Alexander. I have a new original story for you. Enjoy watching.
The dead rose crumbled the moment her fingers touched it, and something in the garden woke up. Nessa had crossed this path 100 times before. She knew every broken stone, every twisted branch, every shadow that pooled beneath the withered hedges. But tonight, the garden felt different. Tonight, it was watching her. She was carrying a bundle of ruined silk against her chest, the fabric still damp with something dark. The mistress had been very clear. Burn it before dawn, speak of it to no one. Not that speaking was something Nessa could do. She hadn't made a sound in 8 years, not since the fever took her voice and left her with nothing but silence and the ability to survive. The midnight air pressed against her skin like cold water. Above her, the moon hung swollen and pale, casting just enough light to reveal the path through the cursed garden. Everyone in Ashworth Manor knew the stories. A bride had died here years ago among these very roses. They said her blood had poisoned the soil. They said nothing had bloomed properly since. Nessa didn't believe in curses. She believed in cruelty, in secrets, in the way powerful people buried their sins beneath beautiful things. But as she hurried past the dead rose bushes, something made her stop. A single black rose, its petals curled and brittle, had caught on the edge of the silk bundle. She reached down to brush it away, and the moment her fingers made contact, the petals dissolved into ash. That's when she heard it. A sound like whispers, like wind through dead leaves, like someone breathing just behind her shoulder. She turned. Nothing. But the ground beneath her feet had changed. Where she had stepped, where her bare feet had pressed into the cold earth, something was growing. Black roses, pushing up through the soil, unfurling their petals in the moonlight. They traced her path exactly, a trail of dark blooms marking everywhere she had walked. Nessa's heart slammed against her ribs. She took a step backward, and another rose bloomed beneath her heel. The garden was following her. If you've ever felt like the world was watching your every move, waiting for you to make one mistake, then you understand the terror that gripped Nessa in that moment. Before we go any further, if you're new here, consider subscribing. Stories like this one, stories about women who survive impossible situations, they're what this channel is all about. And trust me, Nessa's story is just getting started. She ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs shook, until she reached the old gardener's shed at the edge of the property. She threw the silk bundle into the cold fireplace, her hands trembling as she struck the match. The flames caught quickly, eating through the fabric, and for one desperate moment, she thought it was over. But when she turned around, the roses had followed her inside. They were growing through the cracks in the wooden floor, pushing up between the boards, their black petals glistening in the firelight. They formed a perfect circle around her feet, and as Nessa watched, frozen with terror, the petals began to move. They were showing her something. The roses shifted and swirled, and suddenly Nessa wasn't looking at flowers anymore. She was looking at a scene, a memory captured in petals and thorns. A woman in a white dress running through the garden, blood on her hands, someone chasing her. A face twisted with rage that Nessa recognized instantly. Lady Ashworth, the current mistress of the manor, the woman who had just handed Nessa a blood-stained dress and ordered her to destroy it. The vision dissolved as quickly as it had appeared, the petals falling still. But the message was clear. The garden wasn't cursing Nessa. It was trying to tell her something. And whatever truth it held, someone had killed to keep it buried. Nessa had been a servant at Ashworth Manor for 6 years. She had arrived at 20, a fever-silenced woman with no family and no prospects, grateful for any position that would keep her fed. The manor had seemed like salvation then, with its grand halls and its wealthy inhabitants and its promise of stability. She learned quickly that salvation came with a price. Lady Ashworth ruled the household with cold precision. She was beautiful in the way winter is beautiful, all sharp edges and frozen surfaces. Her husband, Lord Ashworth, was a ghost who haunted his own home, spending most of his time locked in his study with bottles of brandy and memories of his first wife. The first wife, Lady Helena, the bride who had died in the garden. No one spoke of her directly. Nessa had pieced together the story from whispers and fragments, from the way the older servants fell silent when they passed her portrait in the East Wing. Helena had been young, beautiful, beloved. She had died on her wedding anniversary, found among the roses with her throat cut. The official story was that she had taken her own life, overcome by some unnamed madness. But the servants knew better. The servants always knew better. They just knew better than to speak. And now Nessa, who couldn't speak even if she wanted to, had stumbled into the heart of a secret that someone was still protecting. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in her tiny room in the servants' quarters, watching the window, waiting for the roses to find her again. They didn't. By morning, she had almost convinced herself it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. Then she stepped outside, and she saw the trail. Black roses, dozens of them, tracing a path from the garden to the shed to the servants' entrance. They stood out against the frost-covered ground, like accusations, impossible to miss, impossible to explain. The household was already in chaos by the time Nessa reached the kitchen. Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper, was pale and trembling. The other servants clustered in corners, whispering frantically, and standing in the center of it all, her face carved from ice, was Lady Ashworth. "Find her," the mistress said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Find the servant who did this. Find the one who woke the curse." Every eye in the room turned to Nessa. Of course they did. She was the silent one, the strange one, the woman who couldn't defend herself with words. She was the perfect scapegoat for anything that went wrong in this house. A broken vase? Nessa must have done it. Missing silverware? Check Nessa's room. A trail of impossible black roses leading through the cursed garden. Who else could it be? Mrs. Brennan stepped forward, her expression caught between fear and reluctant pity. "Nessa was assigned to burn the linens last night, my lady. She would have had to cross the garden." Lady Ashworth's eyes fixed on Nessa with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "Is this true? Did you touch something in the garden?" Nessa couldn't answer. She could only stand there, mute and trembling, as the mistress's gaze stripped her bare. "Lock her in the cellar," Lady Ashworth said finally, "until we determine the extent of the damage she's caused." 2 footmen stepped forward, their grips rough on Nessa's arms. She didn't struggle. What would be the point? She had no voice to protest, no power to resist. No one who would believe her even if she could somehow explain what she had seen. But as they dragged her toward the cellar stairs, she caught a glimpse of something that made her heart stop. Lady Ashworth's hands. The mistress was gripping her skirt so tightly that her knuckles had gone white, and on her left palm, barely visible beneath the lace of her sleeve, was a scratch. Fresh. Raw. The kind of wound you might get from handling thorns, or from struggling with someone in a garden full of roses. The cellar was cold and dark, and smelled of earth and old wine. Nessa sat on the stone floor, her back against the wall, and tried to think. The vision she had seen, the woman in white, the blood, the face of her pursuer. It couldn't be a coincidence. Lady Ashworth had given her a blood-stained dress to burn on that damn night the garden had decided to reveal its secrets. But whose blood was on that dress? And why now, after all these years, was the garden suddenly waking up? The answer came to her slowly, pieced together from fragments of memory and observation. The anniversary. It was almost the anniversary of Lady Helena's death. Every year, the household held a memorial ceremony in the garden, a somber affair where Lord Ashworth laid flowers on the spot where his first wife had died. Every year, Lady Ashworth presided over the ceremony with perfect, practiced grief. And every year, Nessa had noticed, the current mistress grew more tense, more brittle, more desperate to control every detail of the event. What if the garden wasn't cursed at all? What if it was waiting for someone to touch it, to wake it, to give it a voice it had been denied for years? Nessa had no voice. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need one. Maybe the garden could speak for her. She was still working through this thought when she heard footsteps on the cellar stairs, heavy, deliberate, accompanied by the scrape of a lantern against stone. She pressed herself back against the wall, her heart pounding, expecting Lady Ashworth or one of her loyal footmen. Instead, she saw Thomas. Thomas Reed was the head gardener, a man of perhaps 35 with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much. He had worked at Ashworth Manor since before Nessa arrived, and he was one of the few people in the household who had ever shown her kindness. He brought her extra bread from the kitchen sometimes, left wild flowers outside her door when she seemed sad. Small gestures that meant everything to a woman who had learned to expect nothing. Now he stood at the bottom of the stairs, his lantern casting dancing shadows across the walls, his expression unreadable. "I told them I needed to check the wine stores," he said quietly. "We don't have long." Nessa stared at him, not understanding. Thomas crossed the cellar in 3 quick strides and knelt beside her. "I saw the roses, Nessa. I saw where they lead. I know you didn't do this, not the way they're saying." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I also know you were carrying something last night. Something Lady Ashworth gave you." Her breath caught. How did he know? "I watch," Thomas said, as if reading her thoughts. "I watch because someone has to. Because things happen in this house that shouldn't happen, and everyone pretends not to see." His voice dropped lower. "I was here when Lady Helena died. I was the one who found her body." Nessa's hands moved before she could stop them, forming the question she couldn't ask aloud. She had learned to communicate through gestures over the years, simple signs that most of the servants understood. What happened to her? Thomas's face darkened. "They said she killed herself, cut her own throat with a garden knife. But I saw her that morning, Nessa. I saw her, and she was happy. She was planning to tell her husband something, some secret she'd been keeping. She was glowing with it. He shook his head. Women like that don't kill themselves, not without reason, not without someone giving them a reason. Nessa thought of the vision in the roses, the woman in white, running, the blood, the face of her pursuer. She pointed upward, toward the main house, toward the woman who ruled it. Thomas nodded slowly. I've suspected for years. But suspecting isn't proof, and proof is dangerous when you're accusing the lady of the house. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, something that glinted in the lantern light. A ring. Gold, with a small ruby set into the band. I found this in the garden, the day after Helena died. It was caught in the thorns of a rose bush, right where her body lay. It's not Helena's ring. It's too small, and Helena never wore rubies. Nessa took the ring with trembling fingers. She had seen this ring before. She had seen it on Lady Ashworth's hand years ago, before the mistress had stopped wearing jewelry on her left hand entirely. Before she had started wearing long sleeves and lace gloves to cover the scars. The garden knows, Thomas said. It's been holding on to this secret for 8 years, waiting for someone to listen. And now, it's chosen you. He met her eyes, and in his gaze, she saw something that looked almost like hope. I don't know why. Maybe because you can't speak, so you can't be made to lie. Maybe because you're the only one in this house who has nothing left to lose. Nessa wanted to tell him he was wrong. She had plenty to lose. Her position, her safety, her life. Lady Ashworth would not hesitate to destroy her if she became a threat. But she also knew, with a certainty that went deeper than fear, that she couldn't walk away from this. Helena had died in that garden, and her killer had walked free for 8 years. The roses had shown Nessa the truth, and now that truth was her responsibility. She nodded once, a silent promise. Thomas's hand closed over hers, warm and steady. The memorial ceremony is in 3 days. The whole household will be gathered in the garden. If the roses can show what really happened, if they can reveal the truth in front of everyone. He trailed off, the implications hanging in the air between them. It was a dangerous plan, a desperate plan. But it was the only plan they had. I'll get you out of here tonight, Thomas said. There's a passage behind the wine racks that leads to the old root cellar. From there, you can reach the garden without being seen. He stood, his expression hardening with resolve. But Nessa, you need to understand something. If this fails, if Lady Ashworth realizes what we're doing, she won't just dismiss us. She'll make sure we disappear, the same way Helena disappeared. Nessa understood. She had always understood. In houses like this, servants weren't people. They were tools, useful until they became inconvenient, and then they were discarded. But she was tired of being a tool. She was tired of being silent in every way that mattered. Thomas left her with the ring and a promise to return at midnight. Nessa sat in the darkness, turning the small gold band over in her fingers, and thought about the woman who had worn it. Lady Ashworth, the second wife. The woman who had married Lord Ashworth just 18 months after Helena's death. The woman who had stepped into a dead woman's shoes and made them fit perfectly. What had Helena known? What secret had she been planning to share with her husband on the day she died? The questions circled in Nessa's mind like crows, dark and hungry. She didn't have answers yet, but she was beginning to see the shape of them, the outline of a truth that had been buried for far too long. Midnight came slowly. Nessa counted the hours by the distant chiming of the manor's clock, each toll echoing through the stone walls like a heartbeat. When she heard the soft scrape of the wine rack moving, she was already on her feet. Thomas appeared in the gap, his face pale in the moonlight that filtered through the passage beyond. "Quickly," he whispered. "The night watch changes in 10 minutes." They moved through the passage in silence, Nessa's bare feet cold against the packed earth floor. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch as they navigated its twists and turns. Finally, they emerged into the root cellar, a forgotten space beneath the old greenhouse that smelled of damp soil and decay. And roses. It smelled of roses. Nessa stepped out into the moonlight and stopped dead. The garden had changed. Where before there had been only dead bushes and withered branches, now there were roses everywhere. Black roses, their petals gleaming with an otherworldly sheen, growing in impossible profusion. They covered the walls of the greenhouse, climbed the trellises, spilled across the paths in dark waves, and they were all turned toward Nessa. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone was staring at you? Like every eye was fixed on you, waiting to see what you would do next? That's what Nessa felt in that moment, surrounded by thousands of black roses, each one watching her with something that felt almost like hunger. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if you were in Nessa's place? Would you run? Would you hide? Or would you walk straight into the heart of the curse and demand answers? "They're waiting for you," Thomas breathed, his voice barely audible. "They've been waiting for years." Nessa took a step forward, and the roses parted before her like a dark sea. They created a path, a corridor of black petals leading deeper into the garden, toward the place where Helena had died. She followed. The path wound through the overgrown hedges, past crumbling statues and dry fountains, until it reached a small clearing at the garden's heart. Here, the roses grew thickest, climbing over a stone bench and cascading down from a rusted iron archway. This was the spot. Nessa could feel it in her bones, a heaviness in the air, a weight of sorrow and rage that had never been allowed to dissipate. She knelt on the cold ground and pressed her palm flat against the earth. The roses erupted. They burst from the soil in a fountain of black petals, swirling around Nessa like a storm. And in the center of the storm, images began to form. Clearer than before, more detailed, more terrible. Helena, young and beautiful, standing in this very spot. Her white dress pristine, her face radiant with joy. She was holding something, a letter, clutching it to her chest like a treasure. Then another figure appeared, a woman in a dark cloak, her face hidden in shadow. She approached Helena slowly, deliberately, her movements predatory. "You can't tell him," the cloaked woman said, her voice echoing strangely through the vision. "You can't tell anyone." "I have to," Helena replied, her voice trembling but determined. "He deserves to know. He deserves to know that before we were married, you and he—" "Shut up!" The cloaked woman lunged forward, and suddenly there was a knife in her hand, a garden knife with a curved blade. "You stupid girl. You think he'll choose you? You think your precious truth will matter when I'm finished?" Helena tried to run, but the woman was faster. She grabbed Helena's arm, spun her around, and the knife flashed in the moonlight. Blood. So much blood. It sprayed across the white roses, turning them crimson, and Helena fell. But she didn't die immediately. She lay there, gasping, her hand reaching out toward something on the ground. The letter. It had fallen from her grasp, and she was trying to reach it, trying to protect whatever secret it contained. The cloaked woman picked it up. She read it quickly, her body going rigid with shock, and then she laughed. A terrible, broken laugh that held no humor at all. "So that's it," she whispered. "That's what you were going to tell him." Well, she tucked the letter into her cloak and knelt beside the dying woman. No one will ever know now. No one will ever believe a dead woman's accusations. She pulled off her glove and pressed her bare hand against Helena's wound, coating her fingers in blood. Then she wrapped Helena's fingers around the knife and stepped back. "They'll say you did it yourself," she murmured. Poor, mad Helena. Couldn't bear the pressures of her new life. Such a tragedy. The vision began to fade, the petals falling still, but not before Nessa saw one final detail. The cloaked woman turned, and for just a moment, the moonlight caught her face. It was Lady Ashworth, younger but unmistakable, and on her hand, glinting in the darkness, was a gold ring with a small ruby. Nessa gasped, a soundless cry of horror that tore through her chest. She had suspected, yes, but suspecting and knowing were different things. Now she knew. Now she had seen. Lady Ashworth had murdered Helena. She had murdered her and staged it as a suicide, and married the grieving widower, and lived in this house for 8 years, walking past Helena's portrait every day, presiding over her memorial every year, pretending to mourn the woman she had killed. But why? What was in that letter? What secret had been worth killing for? The roses stirred again, and Nessa felt a pull, a tugging sensation that drew her attention to a particular spot beneath the stone bench. She crawled forward and began to dig, her fingers scraping through the cold earth until they touched something solid. Paper. Old, yellowed, but still intact. She pulled it free and held it up to the moonlight. It was a letter, written in a woman's elegant hand, and as Nessa read it, her blood turned to ice. "My dearest Helena," the letter began. "I write this, knowing you may never forgive me, but I cannot carry this secret to my grave. Before your marriage, before I knew you, I was involved with your husband. It was brief and foolish, and ended badly. But it did not end without consequence. I am carrying his child, Helena. A child that will be born in secret, raised in shame, hidden away so that your happiness can remain untarnished. I tell you this not to wound you, but because I believe you deserve the truth. Do with this knowledge what you will. I only ask that you remember, I loved him first, but you love him better. That must count for something. Yours in sorrow, Margaret." Margaret. Lady Ashworth's Christian name. Nessa's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the letter. A child. Lady Ashworth had borne Lord Ashworth's child before his marriage to Helena. A child that had been hidden away, raised in secret, its existence known only to a few. But Helena had found out. She had discovered the letter, and she had been planning to tell her husband the truth, that his mistress had borne him a child, that the woman who would later become his second wife had been lying to him for years. Lady Ashworth had killed to protect that secret. She had killed, and she had married, and she had lived a lie for 8 years. But where was the child now? Nessa looked up from the letter, her mind racing, and found Thomas standing at the edge of the clearing. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the paper in her hands. "You found it," he said, his voice strange and hollow. "After all these years, you found it." Nessa held out the letter, but Thomas didn't take it. Instead, he stepped closer, and in the moonlight, she saw something she had never noticed before. The shape of his jaw, the color of his eyes, the way he held himself, with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in a servant. He looked like Lord Ashworth. He looked exactly like Lord Ashworth. "I was raised by a family in the village," Thomas said quietly. "They told me my mother died giving birth to me, that my father was unknown. But I always knew there was more. I always felt connected to this place, in a way I couldn't explain." He laughed bitterly. "I took the job as gardener because I wanted to be close to the manor. I thought maybe, if I watched long enough, I would find answers." Nessa stared at him, the pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. Thomas was Lady Ashworth's son, Lord Ashworth's son, the hidden child, the secret that Helena had died to reveal. And he had been here all along, working in the garden where his mother had committed murder, tending the roses that had witnessed everything. "I didn't know," Thomas said, his voice cracking. "I swear to you, Nessa, I didn't know what she had done. I suspected she was my mother, yes. I found the ring years ago and I knew it was hers. But I never imagined." He broke off, unable to continue. Nessa rose to her feet, the letter clutched in her hand. She didn't know what to feel. Sympathy for Thomas, who had just discovered his mother was a murderer? Fear, because Lady Ashworth would surely kill them both if she learned what they knew. Or something else, something darker, a cold determination that had been building inside her since the moment she touched that first dead rose. She had the truth now. She had proof. But proof meant nothing if she couldn't make anyone believe it. The memorial ceremony was in 2 days. The whole household would be gathered in the garden, standing in the very spot where Helena had died. If the roses could show their visions to everyone, if they could reveal Lady Ashworth's crime in front of witnesses. But Lady Ashworth wasn't stupid. She had survived this long by being careful, by eliminating threats before they could become dangerous. If she suspected that Nessa had discovered anything, she would act. She would make Nessa disappear, the same way she had made Helena disappear. Nessa needed to be careful. She needed to be smart. She needed to find a way to control the roses, to make them show their visions at the right moment, to the right people. And she needed to do it all without making a single sound. The next morning, Lady Ashworth came to inspect the garden. Nessa watched from the shadows of the greenhouse as the mistress walked among the black roses, her face a mask of controlled fury. The servants had been talking all night about the strange blooms, whispering about curses and omens, and the ghost of the first Lady Ashworth. The rumors were spreading, and Lady Ashworth knew that rumors could be dangerous. "Burn them," she ordered, her voice sharp. "Every last one. I want this garden cleared before the memorial." The servants exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to touch the cursed roses. No one wanted to risk waking whatever dark power had brought them forth. "My lady," one of the footmen ventured, "perhaps we should wait. The roses might be a sign, a message from Lady Helena." Lady Ashworth's hand moved so fast that Nessa barely saw it. The slap echoed across the garden, and the footman stumbled backward, his cheek blazing red. "Lady Helena is dead," the mistress hissed. "She has been dead for 8 years. She does not send messages. She does not haunt gardens. She is gone, and I will not have her memory tainted by superstitious nonsense." She turned to the assembled servants, her eyes blazing. "You will burn these roses, or you will find yourselves without positions. Is that understood?" The servants nodded, cowed into submission. But as they moved to obey, something strange happened. The roses began to move. They didn't just sway in the wind. They turned, all of them, orienting themselves toward Lady Ashworth like flowers following the sun. And as they turned, they began to bloom. New petals unfurled, black as midnight, and on each petal, a single drop of red appeared. It looked like blood. It looked exactly like blood. Lady Ashworth went pale. For the first time since Nessa had known her, the mistress looked afraid. "Get away from me," she whispered, backing toward the house. "Get them away from me." But the roses kept coming, kept growing, kept reaching toward her with their thorny stems. They climbed over the garden walls, pushed through the cracks in the stone path, crept toward the hem of her dress with terrible, patient purpose. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The roses went still. The red drops faded from their petals. The garden fell silent, as if nothing had happened at all. But something had changed. Nessa could feel it in the air, could see it in the faces of the servants who had witnessed the display. They were looking at Lady Ashworth differently now, not with the usual fear and deference, but with something else. Suspicion. Doubt. The garden had made its first move, and Lady Ashworth knew it. That night, Nessa crept back to the garden. She needed to understand the roses, to learn how to control them, to find a way to make them reveal the truth at the memorial ceremony. But when she reached the clearing where Helena had died, she found she wasn't alone. Lord Ashworth stood among the roses, his back to her, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He was holding something in his hands, a small portrait that Nessa recognized as Helena's likeness. "I failed you," he whispered to the portrait. "I failed you, and I've spent 8 years trying to forget. But I can't forget. I can't stop seeing your face, hearing your voice, wondering what you were trying to tell me that day." He pressed the portrait to his chest. "What were you going to tell me, Helena? What secret did you die for?" Nessa's heart clenched. She had the answer to his question. She had the letter that would explain everything, that would expose his wife as a murderer and reveal the existence of the son he never knew he had. But she couldn't speak. She couldn't tell him anything. And even if she could, would he believe her? Would he believe a mute servant over the woman he had married, the woman who had shared his bed for 8 years? She took a step backward, intending to slip away unseen, but her foot caught on a root, and she stumbled. Lord Ashworth spun around, his eyes wild with grief and surprise. "Who's there?" he demanded. Then he saw her, and his expression shifted to confusion. "You. The servant they locked in the cellar. The one they say woke the curse." Nessa stood frozen, unable to run, unable to explain. Lord Ashworth studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the roses that surrounded them. "They're not afraid of you," he said slowly. "The roses, they're not attacking you. They're waiting." He took a step toward her, and the roses parted to let him pass. When he reached her side, He looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You know something," he said. It wasn't a question. "You know something about Helena's death. Something you can't tell me." Nessa's hands moved before she could stop them, forming the words she had been holding inside for so long. "Your wife. She killed her. I saw it. The roses showed me." Lord Ashworth's face went white. "What are you saying? What do you mean the roses showed you?" But before Nessa could respond, before she could try to explain the impossible, a voice cut through the darkness. "There you are." Lady Ashworth stepped out of the shadows, her face twisted with cold fury. Behind her, 2 footmen carried torches that cast dancing shadows across the garden. "I knew you would come back here," the mistress said, her eyes fixed on Nessa. "I knew you couldn't resist. You're just like her, you know. Just like Helena. Always digging where you shouldn't. Always looking for secrets that don't belong to you." She turned to her husband, and her expression softened into something that might have been concern. "Darling, you shouldn't be out here. You know how the garden upsets you. Come inside. Let me take care of this." "Take care of what?" Lord Ashworth asked, his voice strangely flat. "Take care of the servant who seems to know more about my first wife's death than anyone else in this house." Lady Ashworth's mask slipped, just for a moment. Fear flickered in her eyes, quickly suppressed. "She knows nothing. She's a mute, a simpleton. She probably touched something she shouldn't have, and now she's having delusions." "Then why are you so afraid of her?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Lady Ashworth stared at her husband, and for the first time, Nessa saw the cracks in her perfect facade. The woman was terrified. She was terrified because she knew the truth was closing in, because she could feel the garden's judgment pressing against her like a physical weight. "I'm not afraid," Lady Ashworth said, but her voice trembled. "I'm concerned. For you, for the household, for the memorial ceremony. These roses, these visions, they're disrupting everything. They need to be destroyed." "No." The word came from Lord Ashworth, quiet but absolute. "No, Margaret. The roses stay, and so does the servant." He looked at Nessa, and in his eyes, she saw something that might have been hope. "I want to know what she knows. I want to see what the roses have shown her." "You can't be serious," Lady Ashworth hissed. "You would trust a mute servant over your own wife?" "I would trust anyone who might finally tell me the truth about Helena's death." Lord Ashworth's voice broke on his first wife's name. "I've spent 8 years wondering, Margaret. 8 years of nightmares and doubt, and the terrible feeling that I failed her somehow. If this woman, if these roses, can give me answers, then yes, I will trust them over anyone." Lady Ashworth's face contorted with rage. For a moment, Nessa thought she might attack, might reveal herself completely in a fit of desperate violence. But then the mistress composed herself, smoothing her features into a mask of wounded dignity. "Very well," she said coldly. "If you want answers, you shall have them. At the memorial ceremony, in front of the entire household, we will see what these roses have to say." She turned to the footman. "Escort the servant to her room. Make sure she's comfortable. She has a very important performance to give in 2 days." The footman moved forward, but Lord Ashworth held up his hand. "She stays with me tonight, in the East Wing, where I can protect her." "Protect her?" Lady Ashworth laughed, a brittle sound that held no warmth. "From what?" from whatever might happen to her before she can reveal the truth. The two of them stared at each other, husband and wife, and Nessa could feel the tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed in the balance of power at Ashworth Manor. And in 2 days, at the memorial ceremony, everything would come to a head. Nessa allowed herself to be led to the east wing, to a small but comfortable room that had once belonged to Helena's lady's maid. Lord Ashworth posted a guard outside her door, a young footman who seemed more confused than threatening. She should have felt safer. She should have felt hopeful, knowing that Lord Ashworth was on her side, that the truth was finally within reach. But as she sat by the window, watching the black roses sway in the moonlight, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lady Ashworth had given in too easily. She had agreed to the memorial ceremony confrontation without a fight, almost as if she wanted it to happen. Almost as if she had a plan. Nessa thought about the letter hidden in her dress, the proof of Lady Ashworth's secret child. She thought about Thomas, the son who didn't know the full extent of his mother's crimes. She thought about the roses and the visions they had shown her and the terrible power they seemed to hold. And she realized, with a cold certainty that settled in her stomach like a stone, that she was missing something, some piece of the puzzle that would change everything. The roses had shown her how Helena died. They had shown her who killed her. But they hadn't shown her why Lady Ashworth had been in the garden that night in the first place. They hadn't shown her what had brought the two women together, what had sparked the confrontation that ended in murder. Helena had found the letter. She had learned about Lady Ashworth's secret child. But how? The letter had been buried in the garden, hidden beneath the stone bench. How had Helena known where to look? Unless someone had told her. Unless someone had wanted her to find it. Nessa's blood ran cold as a new possibility took shape in her mind. What if Helena's death hadn't been a crime of passion? What if it had been planned, orchestrated, set in motion by someone who wanted both women destroyed? What if there was another player in this game, someone she hadn't seen yet? Someone who had been pulling strings from the shadows for 8 long years. She needed to go back to the garden. She needed to ask the roses more questions, to dig deeper into the past, to find the missing piece before the memorial ceremony. But when she tried the door, she found it locked from the outside. She was trapped. Protected, Lord Ashworth had said. But the result was the same. She couldn't leave, couldn't investigate, couldn't do anything but wait for the ceremony and hope that she had enough of the truth to expose Lady Ashworth. Outside her window, the black roses continued their silent vigil. And somewhere in the manor, Nessa knew, Lady Ashworth was making plans of her own. The night passed slowly, each hour marked by the distant chiming of the clock. Nessa dozed fitfully, her dreams filled with blood and roses and the sound of a woman screaming. She woke to the sound of her door opening. Thomas slipped into the room, his face pale and drawn. "I came through the servants' passage," he whispered. "The guard is asleep. We don't have much time." Nessa sat up, her heart pounding. She reached for the letter, but Thomas shook his head. "I know what it says. I found a copy, years ago, hidden in my foster mother's things. I've always known who my real parents were." His voice was bitter. "I just didn't know my mother was a murderer." Nessa's hands formed a question. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I had no proof. Because who would believe a gardener's word against a lady's? Because... He hesitated, his expression twisting with shame. Because part of me didn't want to believe it. She's my mother, Nessa. Whatever she's done, she's still my mother. Nessa understood. She understood better than anyone the complicated bonds of family, the way love and loyalty could blind you to terrible truths. But she also knew that some truths couldn't stay buried forever. Some secrets demanded to be told, no matter the cost. She reached out and took Thomas's hand, squeezing it gently. Then she pointed to the window, to the garden below, to the roses that were waiting. Thomas nodded slowly. The ceremony is tomorrow. Whatever happens, whatever the roses reveal, it ends then. He met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw a resolve that matched her own. I'll help you, Nessa. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure the truth comes out, even if it destroys my mother, even if it destroys me. They sat together in the darkness, two servants bound by secrets and sorrow, waiting for the dawn that would change everything. But as the first light of morning crept across the sky, Nessa heard something that made her blood freeze. Screaming, coming from the garden. She rushed to the window and looked down, and what she saw made her heart stop. The roses had moved again. During the night, while she slept, they had crept across the grounds and surrounded the manor. They covered every wall, every window, every door. They had turned the great house into a prison of thorns. And in the center of the garden, standing among the black blooms like a queen among her subjects, was a figure in white, a woman. Pale as death, her dress stained with old blood, her eyes fixed on the manor with an expression of terrible patience. Helena. The dead bride had returned, and she was looking directly at Nessa's window. Helena's ghost didn't move. She simply stood there, her blood-stained dress rippling in a wind that didn't exist, her eyes locked on Nessa's window, with an intensity that felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. Thomas grabbed Nessa's arm. "We need to go. Now!" But Nessa couldn't look away, because Helena wasn't just staring at her, she was pointing. One pale, translucent finger extended toward the east wing, toward the very room where Nessa stood. No, not toward the room, toward the floor beneath Nessa's feet. The roses around Helena began to move, crawling across the garden in a black tide, climbing the walls of the manor with impossible speed. Nessa heard screaming from other parts of the house as servants woke to find thorns pressing against their windows, petals falling through cracks in the stone. And then Helena spoke. Nessa couldn't hear the words, not through the glass, not across the distance, but she felt them. They vibrated through her bones, through her blood, through the very silence that had defined her entire life. Find what she buried beneath you. The ghost vanished. One moment she was there, solid as memory, and the next she was gone, leaving only a circle of dead roses where she had stood. Thomas was pulling at Nessa's arm, his face white with terror. "The passage. We need to get out before the roses seal us in." But Nessa shook her head. She dropped to her knees and began pressing on the floorboards, searching for a loose plank, a hidden compartment, anything that might explain why Helena's ghost had pointed here. Thomas understood. He joined her, running his hands along the edges of the floor, and within moments, he found it. A board that shifted slightly under pressure, revealing a narrow gap beneath. Inside was a small wooden box, covered in dust and cobwebs. It had been here for years, hidden in a room that had once belonged to Helena's lady's maid. Nessa opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a second letter. And this one wasn't about Lady Ashworth's secret child. This one was written in Helena's own hand. Thomas read it aloud, his voice shaking. "If you are reading this, I am dead. And the person who killed me is not the one you suspect. Lady Ashworth is guilty of many sins, but she did not plan my murder. She was merely the weapon. The hand that guided her belongs to someone who was hidden in plain sight for 8 years. Someone who wanted both of us destroyed. Someone who knew that Lady Ashworth's jealousy would make her the perfect instrument of death." Nessa's mind raced. If Lady Ashworth hadn't planned the murder, then who had? Who had manipulated her into killing Helena? Thomas continued reading. "I discovered the truth too late. I found the letter about her secret child. But I didn't find it by accident. It was placed where I would see it. Someone wanted me to confront her. Someone wanted us to destroy each other." The letter ended with a name that made Thomas drop the paper as if it had burned him. Lord Ashworth. Nessa stared at the words, her mind refusing to accept what they meant. Lord Ashworth, the grieving husband who had mourned his wife for 8 years. Lord Ashworth, who had demanded the truth at the memorial ceremony. Lord Ashworth, who had seemed like an ally. He had orchestrated everything. He had planted the letter where Helena would find it. He had known that Lady Ashworth's jealousy would drive her to violence. He had used both women as pawns in a game that ended with his wife dead and his mistress trapped by her own crime. But why? Why would he want Helena dead? The answer came to Nessa in a flash of terrible clarity. Helena had been wealthy. Her family's fortune had come to Lord Ashworth upon their marriage. But if Helena had discovered his affair with Lady Ashworth, if she had threatened to leave him and take her money with her, he had needed her dead. And he had needed someone else to take the blame. Lady Ashworth had been his puppet. And now, 8 years later, he was preparing to sacrifice her at the memorial ceremony, to let her take the fall for a murder he had planned. Thomas was shaking. "My father," he whispered. "He's my father. And he used my mother to kill his wife. He destroyed both of them." Nessa reached for his hand, but before she could offer comfort, the roses outside the window began to scream. It was the only word for the sound they made. A high, keening wail that seemed to come from every bloom at once, a cry of rage and sorrow that shook the walls of the manor. Helena knew. She had always known. And now she wanted justice, not just from Lady Ashworth, but from the man who had truly killed her. The roses were coming for Lord Ashworth. Nessa and Thomas ran. They burst through the servants' passage and emerged into chaos. The manor was in an uproar, servants screaming as black roses pushed through windows and crept under doors. The thorns were everywhere, catching on clothing, scratching skin, leaving trails of blood wherever they touched. And at the center of it all, standing in the main hall, with a look of calculated calm, was Lord Ashworth. He was dressed for the memorial ceremony, his mourning clothes impeccable, his expression one of practiced grief. But when he saw Nessa emerge from the passage, something flickered in his eyes. Something cold and calculating. "Ah," he said softly. "The mute girl. I wondered when you would become a problem." Nessa held up Helena's letter, the proof of his guilt, but Lord Ashworth only smiled. "Do you think anyone will believe you?" he asked. A servant who cannot speak, waving a piece of paper that could have been written by anyone? The roses have already marked you as cursed. Whatever you try to say, whatever evidence you try to present, they will see only a witch trying to save herself. He was right. Nessa knew he was right. Without a voice, without the ability to explain what she had found, she was powerless. The letter was just paper. The truth was just silence. But the roses weren't silent. They were moving toward Lord Ashworth now, creeping across the floor of the hall, their thorns scraping against the marble with a sound like whispered accusations. And as they moved, they began to bloom. Not black this time. Red. Blood red, the color of the stains on Helena's dress, the color of the life that had been stolen from her 8 years ago. Lord Ashworth's composure cracked. "Stop them," he ordered the servants. "Cut them down. Burn them if you have to." But no one moved. The household staff stood frozen, watching as the roses surrounded their master, watching as the curse that had haunted the manor for 8 years finally found its true target. Lady Ashworth appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked different now, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying. She had heard everything. She had heard her lover admit to manipulating her, to using her jealousy as a weapon, to planning the murder that she had committed with her own hands. "You," she whispered, "you made me do it. You planted that letter. You knew I would find Helena in the garden. You knew what I would do." Lord Ashworth's mask slipped completely. "You were always going to kill her," he snarled. "I simply made it easier. I gave you the opportunity you wanted. Don't pretend you didn't enjoy watching her die." The roses surged forward, and Lord Ashworth screamed. But they didn't kill him. They wrapped around his ankles, his wrists, his throat, holding him in place with thorns that drew blood but didn't pierce deep. They were waiting. They were giving him a chance to confess, because that was what Helena wanted. Not death. Not revenge. Just the truth, spoken aloud, acknowledged by the man who had stolen everything from her. Nessa understood now. The curse wasn't about punishment. It was about confession. Helena had died with the truth trapped inside her, just as Nessa lived every day with words trapped inside her. The garden had chosen Nessa because they were the same. Two women silenced by forces beyond their control, both desperate to make the world hear what they could not say. But Lord Ashworth would never confess. Even now, with thorns at his throat and blood running down his face, his eyes were calculating, searching for an escape, a way to turn this to his advantage. "It was her," he gasped, pointing at Lady Ashworth. "She killed Helena. I have proof. Letters, witnesses, everything. She's the murderer, not me." Lady Ashworth laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Of course you do. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Keeping evidence of my crime so you could use it when you needed to. I was never your partner. I was just another pawn." She descended the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the banister, her eyes fixed on the man she had loved for so long. "I killed Helena because I believed you loved me. I believed that once she was gone, we could be together. But you never intended to marry me, did you? You just needed someone to take the blame." The roses around Lord Ashworth tightened, and he cried out in pain. But still, he didn't confess. Still, he searched for a way out. Nessa realized with growing horror that the Roses couldn't force a confession. They could threaten, they could punish, but they couldn't make him speak the truth. And without his confession, without his acknowledgement of guilt, Helena's spirit would never rest. The curse would continue. The Roses would keep growing, keep spreading, keep consuming everything in their path until there was nothing left of Ashworth Manor but thorns and silence, unless someone else spoke the truth for him. Nessa looked at Thomas, and she saw the same realization in his eyes. He was Lord Ashworth's son. He had the standing, the credibility, the voice that she lacked. He could tell the household what they had discovered. He could present Helena's letter and explain what it meant. But doing so would destroy him. He would be revealed as the illegitimate child of a murderer and his accomplice. He would lose everything: his position, his reputation, his place in the only world he had ever known. Thomas met her gaze, and she saw the struggle in his face, the fear, the doubt, the desperate wish that there was another way. Then he straightened his shoulders and stepped forward. "I am Thomas Ashworth," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "The illegitimate son of Lord Ashworth and Lady Ashworth. And I have proof that my father orchestrated the murder of his wife." The household gasped. Lord Ashworth's face twisted with rage. Lady Ashworth closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. But Thomas kept speaking. He told them everything: the letter Helena had written, the trap Lord Ashworth had set, the way he had manipulated Lady Ashworth into committing murder. He spoke clearly and calmly, his voice never wavering, even as his father screamed denials and his mother wept. And as he spoke, the roses began to change. The red blooms faded, their petals softening from blood to pink to white. The thorns retracted, releasing Lord Ashworth from their grip. The screaming silence that had filled the manor gave way to something else, something gentler. Peace. Helena appeared one last time, standing in the center of the hall, her blood-stained dress now clean and white. She looked at Thomas with gratitude, at Lady Ashworth with something like pity, at Lord Ashworth with cold satisfaction. Then she looked at Nessa. "Thank you," her lips formed. "Thank you for giving me a voice." And she was gone. The roses began to wither, their black petals falling to the ground like dark snow. Within minutes, they had crumbled to dust, leaving nothing but faint stains on the marble floor. The curse was broken. But the aftermath was just beginning. Lord Ashworth was arrested that same day. The magistrate, summoned by the household staff, listened to Thomas's testimony and examined Helena's letter. Combined with the evidence Lord Ashworth had kept against Lady Ashworth, it painted a damning picture of conspiracy and murder. Lady Ashworth was arrested as well, but her fate was different. She confessed everything, holding nothing back, accepting responsibility for the crime she had committed, even as she revealed the manipulation that had driven her to it. The magistrate noted her cooperation and her genuine remorse. She would face justice, but perhaps not the harshest justice. Perhaps there would be mercy for a woman who had been used as a weapon by the man she loved. Thomas stood in the garden as the constables led his parents away. Nessa stood beside him, her hand in his, offering what comfort she could without words. "I've lost everything," he said quietly. "My position, my family, my future. I'm the son of 2 murderers. No one will ever look at me the same way again." Nessa squeezed his hand. She wished she could tell him that it would be all right, that the truth was worth the cost, that he had done the right thing. But she couldn't speak. And perhaps that was fitting, because some truths were too complicated for words. Thomas turned to look at her, and something in his expression shifted. "You gave up everything, too," he said. "You could have stayed silent. You could have let the curse consume the manor and walked away. But you chose to fight for the truth, even though you had nothing to gain and everything to lose." Nessa shook her head. She hadn't done it for gain. She had done it because Helena deserved to be heard. Because some secrets were too heavy to carry alone. Because silence, even when it was forced upon you, didn't have to mean powerlessness. "The manor will need a new gardener," Thomas said slowly. "And a new master, once the estate is settled. I'm the only heir, even if I am illegitimate. The courts will have to decide what happens to the property." He paused, looking at the garden where the roses had once grown. The beds were empty now, nothing but bare earth and withered stems. But already, Nessa could see tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil. New growth. New life. "Stay," Thomas said. "Help me rebuild this place. Help me make it something other than a monument to murder and lies." Nessa looked at the garden, at the manor, at the man who had sacrificed everything to speak the truth she couldn't voice. She thought about her own future, the years of silence that stretched ahead of her, the words that would always be trapped inside. But she also thought about Helena, who had finally been heard after 8 years of silence. She thought about the roses, who had given voice to the dead. She thought about the power of truth, even when it came at a terrible cost. She nodded. Thomas smiled, the first real smile she had seen on his face since this nightmare began. "Then we'll start tomorrow. We'll plant new roses, white ones, this time. For Helena, for the truth, for a new beginning." Nessa smiled back, and for a moment, her silence didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a choice, a way of being in the world that was different, yes, but not lesser, not powerless. She had helped Helena speak. She had helped Thomas find his voice, and in doing so, she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. A place where my silence was understood, a home where she belonged. The sun was setting over Ashworth Manor, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the garden, the first white bud was beginning to bloom. And somewhere, Nessa was certain, Helena was finally at rest. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of secrets and the power of truth, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in Nessa's place? Would you have risked everything to expose a killer, even if you couldn't speak the accusation yourself? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories about courage, sacrifice, and the mysteries that hide in the shadows of great houses, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Thank you for watching, for listening, for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that speaks without words.